Oh, hi, I'd like to welcome Robyn Staveley with us today. Robyn was a senior lecturer in music education and psychology at the University of Technology in Sydney. And prior to that, Robyn taught music for 32 years, but she's still pretty busy. So, Robyn, what are you doing these days?
Well, I did have a whole lot of work lined up all over the world last year, but then with COVID, everything shut down.
Yeah.
So it was quite good because I finished my PhD and I just wanted time to let it all settle and sink in and do some more reading that wasn't actually to do with my PhD. So I've learned a whole lot more. I've been mentoring at the Richard Gill School, which has been very interesting, and doing some writing and lining more things up for this year.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you've just completed your PhD on the impact of cognitive neuroscience on music pedagogy. And you've also run neuro-pedagogy courses in Sydney in music. And I know Paula's been to one of those. So, Robyn, you are the right person to ask. How does our brain learn? And how important is it to combine our bodies and our brains in the process?
It's absolutely essential because without the body, the brain doesn't receive any information. And in fact, when you think about how the brain learns, you've got to think about a unified system between the brain, the body, and the world. Because without a body, the brain perceives nothing. And without the world, there's nothing for the body to respond to. So when I think about how the brain learns, it's always considering the brain, the body, and the world as a unified system. They all respond together. So as you move out into the world, and that's the other part of it, without movement, there is no learning. And movement isn't just a dance or playing your instrument or singing, and people don't often think about singing as movement, but that is movement as well. But it can be as simple as just turning your head a different way to get another perception, because movement is changing perception, or even from one thought to another. It can be really subtle. But if you're passive and not moving, you're not learning anything. So the brain learns through this body and the world as a unified system in action.
Okay, so you've also spoken about the importance of eyes and hands in learning. Why is that?
Well, what neuroscience has shown us is that the brain fires very strongly for face and hands. And this is a survival technique because when you read other people's expressions of fear, you know that there's something in the environment that you need to be careful of. So it's very important that we can read facial expressions. It tells the other person whether you're friendly, whether you're an enemy, whether you are approving or you're disapproving or you're happy, you're sad. All of these are very important things for us to understand in the world. So humans take a lot of notice, and the brain takes a lot of notice of face. Hands are the next big thing because hands are what we use so precisely. And again, it's for protection. So weapons or instruments or utensils or tools are all mainly used by the hands or in conjunction with other parts of the body. So when I learned all about that, it really became meaningful to me that my teaching has to have a lot of expression of the face and of the hands, because that is processed instantly, long before language. Language takes a long time to process in comparison to hands and face. So as a teacher, I'm always thinking my face needs to tell the story. It needs to reward the student. It needs to direct the student, get attention from the student, and my hands reinforce it. Gesture was pre-language. Gesture enhances the message. And so you can see I'm using my hands all the time. And I don't stop myself because I know that invites the learner in.
Yes.
So I'm very conscious of what I do with my hands. So if I'm wanting to start the group singing, I won't go 1, 2, 3, or ready, set, go. Or sometimes I will. But quite often it will be my face and my hands. I might just go and we'll start because I know that resonates in the brain.
Yes, and good conductors do the same thing, don't they, in orchestras?
Yes, we already unconsciously know all of these things.
Yes, and I think even from we have to be so looking at ourselves from the outside in, if we can, in terms of even how we greet the students and in our facial expressions. I know my kids used to come home from school, oh, she's a terrible teacher. Why? Oh, she never smiles, and that kind of thing. So that even their impression of you and how much they like you or whatever, it all comes back to what you look, like how you look on the outside to some extent,
Yes, and whether you look at your students, when you look them in the eye, without any words at all, it's like you're saying, you're welcome, you're invited in, you're part of what we're doing. So yes, face is very important. And real faces are really important. That's the other interesting thing that's come out of neuroscience. Real faces fire more in people's brains than avatars or cartoon faces. And especially those faces that you've had a relationship with, they'll fire the most. So sometimes you could only have to see a picture of that face and you'll see that there's all sorts of things going on in the brain of that perceiver.
Yeah, you can absolutely. Well, you just have to look back at a photograph of your own childhood with your mum or something, and you're transported back there, aren't you?
That's right.
So, how can we use this in our teaching? I mean, certainly we talked about how we communicate with our students, but what about screens and even perhaps use of video or that kind of thing? Like, screens are here to stay. There's a lot of controversy about kids watching YouTube videos, and teachers are worried about it's not effective or proper learning, or it's cheating if they learn something from a video. What do you say about that?
I think it's all a matter of balance, because as you say, it is here to stay, and you choose the tool that is the most suited to whatever you're learning. But because I look at embodiment and because I know that movement is always key, I'm always looking for the technology that will reflect what we've already moved and what we already know, or what we can move. There are some great little apps for composition that you can put your own voice into and you can put your own movement into. But the other thing about technology at present, and we all know that it develops very quickly, but at present, it's the same action on the iPad or the computer as it is for any other subject. So we're not differentiating as music teachers what's different. We might be doing musical things on it, but we're still using the mouse and the cursor, and that's not a different whole body action to any other subject. So these are the things I think teachers need to keep in mind. It's quite different if you've done a great big lesson of movement and dance and you've sung and you've played and you've improvised and you've composed and you use lots of different instruments, and then you go to the computer, because then what you do on the computer represents the action and the memory that you've created through doing. So it's a matter of balance and choosing what is going to be the strongest learning.
Yeah, so it's like immersing our bodies in this. So something like, before we go to something digital, so something like if we've been doing a teaching point around a piece and we've done a lot of work on that piece, is it good for us to make a video of us playing the piece for our students to watch and sort of remember at home? I think one of the problems is that we do all this work in the lesson and then it was all fantastic and then they kind of forget.
I think the videos of what you've done together are excellent because they understand what they're looking at. It's not like it's a different person or it's a different piece. It's what they've already embodied through what they've done, and they have the opportunity to do this wonderful thing that the brain loves to do. And what the brain really loves to do is compare and contrast, categorize, and predict. The brain is a predicting machine based on all its past memories. So when it is satisfied that the prediction is right, it's rewarding. So those videos, because you've done it with them, you've enabled them to make a memory and make predictions that are rewarding because they're coming true, and they can correct themselves. And that's another really good thing about recording what you have done with them. They get that self-correction, and correction is learning. If you can already do it, you're not learning anything new. You're correcting yourself, or you're even perceiving a problem, that is learning. That's what we want students to do. Always find what they can't do.
And so how important is, because there's learning at the piano and at the instrument, but well, I guess after COVID times, when we all go, if we ever go back to busy lives when we can't actually be at our pianos and we're not at our home, like driving in the car on the way home from work, from school or whatever, because a lot of kids spend a lot of time in that car. Well, they used to. So away from the piano learning, if they were watching a video, is that useful learning?
Watching any video or watching a
No,
video?
watching a video of you. Like, let's say you did record something that you did with the student, and then they watched that on the way. You know, they weren't actually at the piano when they were watching it.
Oh, no,
Away from...
that's really good, because they do have that memory, and that memory is stored as a motor memory because they've done it. And a motor memory is very strong because it's not just the motor part of the brain, it's all the sensory parts of the brain as well. So when they're watching it, all of those are activated, not as strongly as when they were doing it, but it is activated. It's making those pathways stronger. So the key to that is that you have done it with them. It is something they've already done. If it's something they have no relationship with, there's no point. It might be entertaining, but they're not going to learn anything. So that's another thing that a teacher has to have a judgment about. What are you asking your students to watch? Are you asking them something that will resonate in their brain because they've done it, or is it something completely new? You can look at something new if you've got a big background of experiences to learn something new. Like, I'll watch a video about the brain, and because I've got a big background about the brain, I'll learn something new from it because it resonates with me, even though I haven't personally been involved with that video. So you've got to think the teacher, what is the balance here? What will resonate with my student's brain? And definitely something you have done with them will resonate.
Exactly. And it's sort of like, I guess if they watched, this is an extreme comment, but if they watch someone teaching you how to play Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1, and they've only done about, they're only intermediate student or something, as opposed to them watching somebody explain how to do something of a similar level to them, they could probably maybe learn from that if that experience was within cooee of where they are.
Yes, it's a bit like Vygotsky was a very famous psychologist who was Russian, and he died very young. And it was 40 years later before he became famous for his zone of proximal distance theory, which is you can stretch your students' learning if you move them from where they are to just a bit beyond. So it's reachable with support, but not too far that they just can't reach it. Mm-hmm. So this is a very important concept in teaching. And so getting back to your example, something that is within the distance of learning, then they'll attend to it because their brains will resonate with it. If it's too far away, I mean, I guess if they're interested in playing the piano, they're going to be interested in watching it as an entertainment. But what are they learning? It might be important to learn that you can love and to play the piano and be like that one day, but what they'll learn from your video that just moves them beyond is going to be much more.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in the whole body learning, we always talk about a natural learning process of listen, sing, play, read, write. So when it comes to teaching piano or any instrument, how does that process assist the brain to learn more effectively?
I really like that approach because it's going to involve all the senses and all the ways, or as many ways as possible, of being musical. So when you're thinking of many ways of being musical, we call that multimodal learning. So it's not mode as in Aeolian mode, mixolydian mode. It's mode as in ways of behaving. So if we look at lots of different modes of transport, we might think train, bus, boat. And when we're thinking of musical behavior, we're thinking of vocalizing, as in singing and making sounds with the mouth, playing instruments or playing and making sounds, performing in other ways, reading music, all sorts of ways of all the musical behaviors. So if you think of as many different ways as you possibly can of performing and learning about the same idea, that's going to create a synchronized memory. And also if you do it all these different ways, you're doing it in a multisensory way. So in terms of multisensory, we're not just talking about the 5 senses of taste, touch, smell, hearing, vision. They're just the immediate primary senses. There's also two very other important senses that are invisible to us. We don't even think about because they're so automatic to us. And it's related to touch, and it's called the haptic sense. And the haptic sense is this inner sense of pressure and effort and joints and muscles and tendons and digestion and weight and balance. And that's very important in understanding how to perform musically. Because if you think of holding your instrument, you understand that this big, heavy instrument with big strings, after a while of holding it and using it, you realize that's going to be a low sound. Whereas if you hold this little tiny instrument up here, it's probably going to be a high sound. And all of that memory is from the five senses plus the haptic sense plus another type of sense called proprioception. Proprioception is our body's awareness of self in space. So if I want to know where my feet are, I know where my feet are. I don't have to look at them. But if you lose your sense of proprioception, you don't know where your feet are. In fact, you don't know where the world is. So it's completely unconscious to us unless we lose it. So proprioception is another sense that is all melding when we do it many different ways, because we use a body part this way, we use it that way, we use it this way, we stand up, or we use body percussion. All of these different ways facilitate knowledge to be a unified whole. So one sense and one mode informs each other, and they all synchronize together to make a unified whole that's meaningful. And so one thing means one here, and I understand this because I understand that.
Exactly. And I guess with playing piano, it's we're not like lifting and feeling instruments in the tangible way that perhaps many orchestral instrument players do. But there's certainly that geographical, we often call it keyboard geography, where if we instinctively know the distance between one note and another, or the intervals between notes and another, and because we only hear really right in front of us is a couple of octaves, but there's all of the ones up here and all the notes down here that we've got to get to, and to be able to combine all of that requires that probably proprioception. Is that right?
Definitely proprioception, because you've got to have a sense of the instrument being part of you. And there's a very special system in the brain called the peripersonal system. These are neurons that allow you to use tools, and the way the brain allows tools to be useful to the human body, like a piano, is that it makes the instrument part of your brain. So I often used to say to my students, I've got to look at the piano in my brain to think about this melody, about how to play it, because all of the instruments I play are in my head. They're part of my brain, and that allows my body to understand where it is in relation to it, where it is in space. But the haptic sense also comes into that, because it's very much involved in action, being part of the muscles and the tendons and the joints, and pressure. So to play lightly and softly, you have to not only have that sense of where the body parts are, but also managing the weight and the effort and the balance of the body with the instrument, so you can play lightly and softly, or loudly and strongly.
Exactly. I think also one of the things that I've always known, we always know the importance of singing, but at Christmas time we had a friend over. We always do this big concert party, and we had a friend, a guy, a lovely fellow, Peter Kransky, who I've never met before, and he came over with another friend who plays cello, and so he was playing, and then Paul goes, "Oh, could you play this piece?" And he went, "Yeah, sure." And then he gave Levante a piece of, he said, "Oh, Levante probably needs the music, but I should be able to follow along." And he started, when he was following, he was singing. And I think, oh yeah, when I'm playing by ear and that kind of stuff, I'm absolutely singing internally. And it's that connecting the instrument to the sound and to the body, it's that kind of conduit. Would that be right?
You're absolutely right. Because again, unconsciously, we know that when we sing, we're putting the effort to sing high, and we unconsciously do things like lift the eyebrows and the cheeks, and then we sing low. The body tends to get lower, and that helps us understand. It's also the vocal mechanism does different things. So I sing when I'm trying to get a melody as well, because if I have to jump from a low note to a high note, my body through my voice understands that there is a big distance or a small distance, and that's synchronized with my hearing. So the effort of singing and synchronizing with hearing and playing the piano or other instruments are all informing each other, and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Each mode and each sense are informing each other and balancing each other out. And again, the brain predicts, it compares, and when there's an error message, oh, I needed to go higher, the hearing tells you, and your body immediately responds. So that integration is essential to a fully engaged and a fully knowledgeable sense of musicality.
Yeah, yeah. And when you're singing, you're thinking sound. You hear. I'm imagining the sound of like a chordal structure. I'm just imagining the sound,
Yes.
and it connects to my fingers. I'm not really sure I'm not actually cognizant of the notes that I'm playing specifically, but I know I can hear the sound, and the singing helps me think that, oh, just create that sound, I guess. So it is a connection, isn't it? And
Yes.
that's what Peter was doing that night. I know. It's funny. I know. Yeah, I've been there. Okay, get that.
Yes.
So
And you've just hit on something else. You said that you can hear the accompaniment, or you can hear the orchestra in the
yeah,
background. And that's again part of that unified knowledge. When we're teaching, I think some old traditional methods, and definitely the way that I was taught, we learned little chunks and it never went into the meaningful whole.
mm,
So it was shallow learning. It was connected to nothing.
mm,
Whereas now we understand that the brain learns best when it's connected to the meaningful whole. So
mm,
it still means those little chunks are important, but you keep putting it back into the meaningful
mm.
whole. And that's what you're describing. You were taking out the melody, but in the background, it was related to that meaningful background of all the chords, the structure, the accompaniments, the counter melodies, maybe, all of those things that made that little chunk of melody meaningful in the background. It's the whole picture that gives the meaning. You don't look at a landscape picture and just have a river. You have a river coming down the mountains and with the trees, or if it was just a river, you'd pass it by because it would mean nothing. And it's the same with all knowledge.
That's right.
It's useless unless it's in a meaningful whole.
So let's talk about that, because with whole body learning, we really like to use the backing track to create that meaningful whole, and not only in terms of the whole, in terms of the melody and all that, but also we find that the whole in terms of the orchestration and experiencing that piece as this multi-layered, painting, if you like, to use your example, is really useful in terms of even interpretation for our students. And we just teach a fragment of melody, and then we play the whole backing track, and the students just put that fragment in whenever it turns up. But if we look at a traditional kind of process, where probably a traditional way of teaching a piano piece would be teacher does a model performance, then we would teach a right hand, teach a left hand, and then hopefully we'll teach hands together. So, and by teach I mean that the students will start with just one note at a time, plunking away at it, trying to, because we have to do this read play approach where they just read the notes and what have you, and then some bits come more easily, so therefore the melody isn't always very evident because they're just reading notes. And so then gradually over a couple of weeks, students become a bit more proficient at the timing and then at the notes, because the teachers are constantly correcting the mistakes or the errors. And then also wrong fingers get used, and then correcting fingers, and then hopefully gradually it start to sound like a piece. So essentially there are a lot of times where there's mistakes of timing, fingerings, notes, phrasing, and everything all need correcting. So is this a very brain efficient way or friendly way of actually teaching? Because it's the way it's been done for centuries, I guess. So
It's been done for centuries, and many people say to me, "Oh, why do all of those games and all those little bits and pieces keep coming back?" And it's because of the musicality and the reward. I mean, there's lots of very fine musicians who have been taught in the way you just described, and they did find that rewarding. But we want everyone to find it rewarding and quickly. It doesn't look quick, but it is quick because they're putting that information into its meaningful place very quickly and recognizing it. And that's, again, that prediction and error detection that the brain does. And, you know, the brain is born with that. The brain is born with the strategies. We're not a blank slate when we're born. We're born physicists and scientists already testing after a few days of being born. Babies recognize a different face. And that's part of that mechanism of predicting. This doesn't look like the face I'm used to. And it's the same with all learning. So learning a bit and then recognizing it in the whole is really filling in the picture bit by bit. And it's so rewarding because you can achieve something really quickly. You don't have to learn very much. And learning just a little bit is achievable before you put it into this thing that sounds so wonderful. How rewarding is that? It's not very rewarding when you're going plonk, 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 day after day. And that's what used to put off children. They would stick at it because it wasn't rewarding quickly. Not that rewards have to be quick to be good, but when you're first learning, you do need a lot of reward quite quickly so that you see that it's useful to do these things and to sustain the effort. And you're not going to sustain the effort if it's not rewarding quite early on.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're going, do I like this piece? Do I not like this piece? Do I not? You're kind of still going, do I want to play this piece? Do I not want to play this piece? And then, so, you know, when they're in that kind of making up their mind thing, that's an important thing. I think the other thing is that also they're very influenced by people around them. You know, I know that when I was young and practicing, because I learned that way, my dad would go, yeah, it'll be good when you can play it. Thanks. Or it's a wonder I survived, isn't it? Oh yeah, it's finally coming together. It's starting to come together. So that was a better thing for him to say. But so many more. So I think there's a lot of people out there going, oh God, does he have to play that?
And you have to play it again.
So it's that kind of also being rewarded.
Those decisions yourself that you like playing it, you're much more likely to repeat playing it because you want to get better. And the drive to get better is always more successful when it comes from you, self-directed learning. And if there's some essence of, I have achieved this, then it's much more likely to develop that sense of love of learning in music. So what you just said about they learn a bit and then you play the accompaniment and they play when they hear it, that's self-directed learning because they've had to recognize it. That is so rewarding and it's so joyous. And the lovely thing about playing the whole piece through, it drives attention as the music intended. Whereas this stop, start, stop, start, stop, start is not musical. That's not how music occurs. So I think one of the best ways about learning music is to learn a little bit that's achievable and put it into the meaningful whole. And that accompaniment is then in their heads, as you described before. When they're at home and they're practicing it, they're hearing the accompaniment in their heads. They're developing audiation, which is another musical behavior, thinking musically.
And also I think they're creating the understanding about how the whole, they're hearing that backing track, which means they're hearing the whole thing. They're hearing how they get to see or get to understand and remember how the whole thing goes, how this whole piece actually supposed to sound. You know, so many times I've heard lots of students over the years will play a piece and you're thinking, what was that piece? and they go, oh, it was Fer-Elise. You're thinking, right. It didn't sound like Fer-Elise. Oh, so it's that, whereas if they know how it sounds, then they will match their own, what they're making to how it's supposed to go. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, and that's rewarding. They'll want to keep doing that. And it's a challenge. It's like that distance of learning again, having that little bit of challenge, adding a bit of novelty in, that bit of challenge makes you want to do it.
Yeah. And it's a bit like, I always think it's a bit like coming in with a backing track. It's a bit like skipping. You know how you got the skipping rope and everybody, you had one person on one end and one other person on the other end and you're skipping and you've got to come in at the right time.
Yes.
Playing with the back, particularly when you're playing fragments with the backing track, you've got to listen to the backing track and play your piece coming in at the right tempo, at the right time, with the right thing. You know, it's sort of a bit like skipping. So it's a bit gamified.
Well, oh no, am I going to get it?
Yeah.
That's another fun thing about group lessons as well. Socializing when you're learning is also what the brain loves to do, because you build upon each other's knowledge. You can construct knowledge more. You can group problem solve. You learn from other people. It means the focus isn't always on you. And if you're not quite hearing it yet, you can watch somebody else. And that's your self-directed learning again, because you're looking for all the cues in the world that will help you to learn yourself. And that's ultimately what we want our students to do, no matter what they're learning, is to be able to have the tools to learn themselves. So socializing is really important in learning, because you learn how to learn off others.
So what kind of, many teachers are teaching one-on-one. So what kind of ways can they embrace that? Because, I mean, Paul teach, all our 4-day schools, group teaching, we love it. Classes of up to, small classes of 8. And that's, and just so integral in them even progressing, because the whole class just moves on and on, has a momentum about it. And we've even shown, we've even got, plenty of evidence where the groups actually move faster than the private lessons. So that's kind of really interesting. But a lot of people don't teach in that way. They teach one-on-one. So what kind of ways can they embrace that group idea or the social idea, those private lessons?
Well, side-by-side teaching instead of teacher and student teaching. So just like 2 students would, they take it in turns. They group problem solve. The teacher might play an accompaniment or play a melody and suggest, what could we do with this? Or here's a little melody, or take their melody. What else can we do with this? Let's change it a bit. Let's change a few of the notes. Let's change the tonality. Let's change the structure. Let's change the meter. So it's a side-by-side learning instead of front and back learning, where the teacher just gives everything and the students to just take it all in.
Yes. I guess you could also invite the student coming afterwards or before to come a little bit early, and then they could do some rhythmic games and activity, that type of thing as well, I guess. That's sort of...
Definitely. Yeah. And especially if the students know each other, it's good fun.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. So what about enriched learning environment? I know you like the enriched learning environments. What is an enriched learning environment?
Enriched learning environments sort of encompass everything. That was sort of the conclusions of my study, that enriched environments are those environments that ensure neuroplasticity is going to take place. So neuroplasticity is the way the brain changes in response to learning. And as I said, the key to it all is movement, self-directed movement. You've got to do something in the world to learn something. So an enriched environment, and now you're thinking like a teacher, how can I provide the most enriched environment for my students to learn? So what the research has shown is that socializing is very important. The other things that are really important are options, that you can have choices. So there's a sense of keeping my identity, because I've still got some choices here. Novelty, that you keep on presenting new bits that will challenge. And that's the other thing, challenge. And attention. The very first thing you've got to do is get their attention. How do you get their attention? You can play something familiar. You can play a game that you know that they like. You can trick them. You can surprise them. But no matter what, if you haven't got their attention, they're not going to learn. And if they're not acting, they're going to be passive learners. So what the research has shown about enriched environments is that students learn more. They learn more quickly. They develop better problem-solving skills. They grow more neurons, because the more active you are in your learning, the more the hippocampus is involved for making memories. It's the structure at the back of the brain. And that is part of the process of developing neurogenesis, growing new neurons. In the experiments on rats, they also lived longer. They didn't get Alzheimer's disease. It was amazing what the results of active, enriched environments had on rats. So they did a control experiment, lots of experiments, but the control was a rat in a normal sort of environment. The next part of the experiment was a rat in a challenging environment. So it had all the toys, all the options, all the good food, everything except other rats. And the experiment one had socializing, all the toys, good food, and that was the difference. So no toys, lots of toys, but on their own, everything. And the important thing was the rat who was in the environment where there were lots of toys and choices and good food didn't do as well, didn't learn as well, didn't problem solve as well, didn't live as long, wasn't as healthy as the rats who were socializing and had challenge and variety and choice. And they had attention because of all of that variety. They'd rush in there to see what was new and immediately go and investigate what was new. And they were very active, they were fitter. That's why they lived longer, because their bodies were healthier. So enriched environments, when I'm planning my lessons, I'm thinking, how am I going to enrich these environments? Sometimes it will be a completely blank room because I want them to create the room. The sound or the action will be instigated from me. But sometimes I'll have lots of things in the room that will be all part of the same idea. So for example, one of the recent ones I was doing was all about flow in music, how to create the idea of flow. So I made the whole room look like a page out of a book. I read them this beautiful book, a picture book, and there was a river going through the countryside. So we created this river and we created mountains and birds. And they all had to make their birds, and they all had to move these birds on a cane so that they fluttered to some music. So they were synchronizing flowing movements with the music. And this sent into their haptic system and their proprioceptive system and their sensory system the feeling of flow. And then they had to create that on instruments. And then we created a score. So all sorts of things. We were playing, we were using vocalizing, we were using singing, we were making, using the body to make flowing sensations as well as things that flowed. And so by the end, they had a multimodal, multi-sense. And so that was an enriched environment that was full of things, but it doesn't have to be full of things. It can be full of sounds. It can be full of the activities that are going to be multisensory and multimodal, challenge, options, variety, socializing, problem solving with each other, etc.
Sounds like fun. I wish I had been there.
It's lots of fun.
Like those little birds in the cane. That could have been really cool to do.
Gorgeous.
Yes, I think the sense of variety. It's kind of like, oh, wonder what she's got planned for me today.
That's right. And that's what you sort of like this surprise, can't wait to get into the classroom to see what's going to happen next. And of course, I was doing this with adults. So they come in trying to be a bit cool. They can't resist it. It's so much fun. I want to have a go. Oh, how do you make them do this? And making really embodies the feeling. And when you've made it yourself, you really feel that flow. It was absolutely beautiful to see a lot of people who'd never danced before. Some of the students had never done music at school before, which is, you just can't believe that they've never had any sort of musical experience before. And the joy when they felt their bodies were the music by using these birds for flow. It was just absolutely a gorgeous thing to see. I mean,
It would have been
vocal and robust about it, but because they were so, adults are much more confined, to see the joy in their face was just such a joyous thing, because the music was them. Their bodies were the music. And moving this, because they can't play instruments, they couldn't play instruments at that stage or sing, this was their way to be a musician.
Experience it. And so you've seen some of Paul's classes. In fact, I think some of Paul's classes might well have been in your study. So, with the whole body learning, so what did you find brain friendly about how you've seen Paul teach?
Paul is a great example of challenge, variety, options, change, problem solving, action, movement. I love the way he got everyone together and singing a song and moving, but very clever movements. And this is what a teacher does. Nothing is for nothing. Everything is for something. So when they were doing movements like that, I knew that it was practicing getting their hands in just the right shape in the right place, ready for what they were going to do in the piano. So even though it felt fun and it was active and it was keeping a beat, it was also achieving another purpose. And that's something the brain loves to do. The brain, everything in the brain is multi-purpose. There's not one place in the brain where one thing is processed. It's a multi-purpose mechanism. And this is what was shown through what we were doing with that song. I really felt that the way with the pianos all around the room, when a child went and played, then they moved to the next piano. And that's such a wonderful orientation for the body to the new instrument, because every piano is a little bit different height. They have to organize the chair and get their bodies synchronized with that new instrument. And there was a mother there or a father there or a carer there as well. So there's that social engagement, that rewarding. The parent or the carer was looking at the child, giving them support and reward, and off it would go again. So that's very supported in neuroscience. That sense of ensemble, because music is very rarely just a solo. Even when you are a soloist, you have a relationship with an audience. But having that sense of ensemble drives you. It keeps you going. There's no time to just sit and think and then get distracted. Keeping the music in place and its musical place kept it going. That was some of the things that were very much in line with neuroscience.
Yes. And lots of oral, lots of singing, and lots of...
Lots of different ways. And I love the way he used the space too. Sometimes he used the space at the piano. Sometimes they were at their instruments. Sometimes they were on the floor. I really liked that really close, because it changed. They really had to look at his face, and his face was really showing what to do. Just tiny, tiny little movements. And having that being near his hands and near everybody else's hands, really focused on which finger and that small little movement, so that when they got back to the piano, of course, it was all prepared and it was easy. And that's the other secret of doing multimodal learning, because it's so many different ways. You've got so many different access points in the brain that it's much more successful when you get to the instruments. That preparation is really important for making it successful when you get there.
Yes, absolutely. So how else is the body important in thinking and learning?
Well, a very contentious issue in neuroscience is the idea of extended thinking. And extended thinking is where you extend your thinking into the tool that you're using, and that helps you think. Now, I use my instruments all the time to think. I will have an idea in my mind, but it's only when I'm mucking around or playing around that I'm extending my thinking into the tool, and new things will arise. So using instruments in being musical is really important, because it extends your thinking into a tool for being more musical. Tools are the things we use as humans to develop a greater capacity and more skill in whatever we're doing. So a hammer will make you more skillful at driving in a nail and building a house. An instrument will give you more skill and more capacity to be musical. So using instruments and the body for body percussion and all of that sort of thing as well, extends your thinking into the body to learn more. So it's really important to have the body doing things, because I think the body is the brain. And when I'm working things out and when I'm improvising and composing, I'm extending my thinking through the body to the instrument. Mm-hmm. The instrument becomes part of my brain and is a tool and is the extension of my brain. And to go back to that idea about the peripersonal neurons in the brain, that are the cells that monitor the space around the brain, they also encompass the instrument into the brain. They make a space in your brain virtually for the instrument, so you understand how to use it. So peripersonal neurons are very much involved in extended cognition or extended thinking.
Mm-hmm. So what does this mean for a piano teacher? How can they embrace this idea to make learning quicker and more efficient?
A bit like that multimodal learning that you do it lots of different ways. So what I can do on the glockenspiel, I can do with my voice, I can do on the piano, I can play with another person on a piano together. So in other words, or I can read it, lots of different ways of doing it. And all of those meld together, but you're using all the tools, because notation, after all, is a tool. All of these things are tools. So we have lots of tools. We have physical tools. I'll look at my list because it's better if I get them all. So we have physical tools for being musical, like materials, like maracas, elastic to create the feeling of tension, scarves to feel like flow. We can have movement, gesture, games, and technology. They're all physical tools. But conceptual tools, tools that we use that develop the concepts, of things like songs and other repertoire, scores, language. We haven't really spoken about language, but language captures musical ideas that we have to transfer from the experience and the feeling into a word. And sometimes those words are the only way that some students have to express their musicality. So language is a conceptual tool. Scales and tonalities are all conceptual tools. And cultural tools are things like ensembles and choirs and orchestras and community events. And lastly, social tools are other people. So we extend our thinking into all of these different things, and it helps us develop our capacity for being musical.
Yeah, so it's really the whole musician. It's not just a read, play, just within me, my instrument, and I mean, very much piano more than any instrument, because it's just always been taught so isolated, in such an isolated condition. And it is a standalone instrument, which is like great. But, whereas the kids at school, my children learn other instruments at school, and how fabulous it was when they always went to orchestra every week and they got to play with other people. And
Yes.
as a pianist, can be so lonely. So it's important that we build in these social opportunities,
Yes,
isn't it?
like the group lessons, and that's really important. And events and those sorts of things where they can be part of it. But the flip side of that is when you play the piano, you get the whole musical sound, you get the accompaniment, you get the melody. So there's
Yes, pluses and minuses. If we just really think about, consciously about creating that social aspect for piano, that can really help, can't it?
yes, and where group lessons come in so beautifully.
Yes, 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 and even theory classes. I know when, as a child, I went to theory classes with and just to learn, just to meet and sort of interact with other people that were doing something that I was doing, because not very many of my friends were doing that. In fact, most of them were kind of pretty. Oh, I quit piano, so they were kind of like, yeah, I don't have to do the scales anymore. I'm so lucky. Of course, they're the ones that go, no, oh, I wish I hadn't quit piano. You're so lucky that you can play. You think, luck? No, it wasn't luck.
Right, that's right.
Perseverance. Sticking to it all. Well, thank you so much for everything you've shared with us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'm sure everyone has got so much out of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you very much.